Episode 51. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight is Adam Davis. Adam, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I grew up in Ohio. I've been in a couple other places, but not for very long at all, just kind of visits type thing. But ever since I was a kid, I was taught how to hunt and track by my grandpa and my one uncle, and I pretty much know the normal stuff that's out there, the deer, the stuff that you would hunt. And, and everything. I'm 40 years old now, going on 41. I've lived in the Cincinnati and Dayton area pretty much all my life, between the two. I'm not exactly sure what else you want me to say on this part.
Oh, no, that's more than good enough right there to help us get a feel for you. What made you get into this dogman research? What sparked your fascination with the subject?
Well, initially when I knew what I was dealing with, it was a report that I had heard through the Dayton Daily news. Then when the Montgomery County Sheriff had said something about not going and looking for the source of these howls, the report that I heard, that I've seen in the Dayton Daily News, was out of Liberty, Ohio, which is just a couple miles outside of the western side of Dayton. I looked it up on the Dayton Daily News website and heard the recording of it. And shortly after, my girlfriend at the time and I were both listening to Coast to Coast AM, and we both heard this interview with the truck driver. I can't remember his name. Scott, I think it was, that had an encounter out there right around Liberty. And at the time, I was still living in Dayton. And I was like, wait a minute, is this the same thing that I just read about? And she was like, Liberty, that's right over here. So we, both kind of got a little bit concerned and interested in it. That's when I kind of started my research in earnest on it. What surprised me the most was the recording that I had heard initially. The 3 or 4 real loud howls, one right after the other. And then if I remember correctly, they played the same recording on Coast to Coast that night, and she heard that, and she said that her hair stood up on the back of her neck because she remembered hearing those kind of howls around where she was at.
You mentioned the howls. This will make a good segue into a part of the show where we can focus on that. You said some time back your mom heard some strange sounding howls. What happened there?
Yeah, it was winter of 2000. She heard this one real loud, piercing howl from back in the woods. And this is in Dayton, where she heard this, because the house where I'm at has about 100 acres of woods that are part of the township behind the house, and there's other woods that are fairly close to the house and everything, but not connected to these woods. So we're used to deer coming in and out all the time and everything. I mean, there's a small herd that kind of stays back in there. She said that she was letting the dogs in, and all of a sudden she just hears this really loud howl, but it, come from the woods. And she's like, what the is that? It was kind of one of those things where, for all lack of better explanation, it scared the living you-know-what out of her. Later on, I played that recording that was from the Dayton Daily News for her, and the look on her face and the fact that she paled before me said it all, although she said, yeah, that's it. Which, kind of surprising, being that this was in an urban area, and she had heard those howls, or heard that howl, I should say, about 5 years before, back in 2000.
I'm surprised when she heard those howls, you didn't hear about that instantly.
Well, sometimes my mom is a little bit closed-lipped about things like this. Generally, she's not. She'll usually tell me about things that are unusual that happen around here pretty quickly. But this, I don't know if maybe it just kind of had her awestruck or what, but it genuinely, I could tell that it genuinely frightened her when she talked to me about it later on, after I told her about the howls out there in Liberty. And it didn't connect for me until later on. And I'm going to say this might be a good segue for what I had happening out here back in 2000. Initially, I didn't know what the was. Well, my friend and I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, that would be a good segue. Tell us all about that. Is that the time when you heard the howls from multiple directions?
No, that was when my friend and I were out in the backyard, and we were out there practicing, because I used to teach martial arts. We heard something inside the edge of the woods, and we were both standing there listening and watching, and it was, something stomping back and forth through the underbrush. Every so often, we were catching glimpses of red eyes looking at us through the dense underbrush. We went back there the next day and looked, and we were expecting to find, something else because of an experience I'd had just previous to that. What we found were big dog-like prints, but we didn't think at that time that it was anything beyond what we were looking for initially. Now, in hindsight, I know what this was because of the experiences I've had since 2000. The eyes were above our head level, and we both stood 6'2". It's level ground from our yard into the woods. We could definitely tell that it wasn't just up on something, and it was, at least 7.5 foot tall, because it was a full head higher than us.
Was this daytime when you were out there and you saw the red eyes in the woods, or was it kind of dusky, darkish?
It was pretty much nighttime. I mean, there was only the light from the porch light behind us. The light was not bright enough to really project out into the woods enough to illuminate anything with eyes that would be like you would expect an animal to have reflective eyes. These seemed self-illuminated.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, instead of looking at a reflector, it was like looking at, say, a flashlight with a red filter over it, almost.
Ooh, that's not good.
Yeah.
Before we move on with the show, I want to make sure we cover the howls that you've heard personally. You mentioned hearing the footsteps in the woods there, but you've had some incidents where you actually heard some sounds on your own. Please tell us about those.
Well, this was at the house out on Diamond Mill, which is no longer there anymore. I was laying in bed, and we had the door open with just the screen door open in the upstairs bedroom, because there was a balcony out there. I started hearing howls from these things. I got up as quick as I could and grabbed my recorder and stepped out there on the porch and turned it on. Well, first I heard one howl from, if I had to guess, maybe about a little better than half a mile away. Then I heard other howls coming from my right and the sort of back behind me over on the other side of the house. It was like they were communicating between each other. And then the dogs in the area started barking. I don't know if you've ever heard of a dog bark when it was scared, but it was that kind of bark. because there was dogs in the area that was, several dogs through the area that were starting to bark in sort of that defensive manner, like they were trying to ward off and tell everybody, hey, something's out here, help. That's the best way that I can explain, that if you've ever heard a dog bark like that, when it's scared and it's trying to alert everybody to come help, that's the type of barking that I was hearing. I've heard, other incidences where I've heard coyotes, out there, and the dogs really didn't respond to the coyotes, but the coyotes would shut up when these things started howling, and you wouldn't hear from the coyotes for a good 2 or 3 weeks after that. It was like they would just move out of the area. It's just kind of crazy when you think about that, for the fact that you've got a pack of wild animals that are scared out of the area by something that's evidently a bigger predator, because generally coyotes don't move off for anybody unless you're shooting at them.
That is a scary thought. There was another incident where you heard a sound, but it wasn't on the ground with you, apparently.
Yeah, that was the incident back in early 2000, around May of 2000. I was in the backyard here at the house in Dayton. Again, it's against the woods here. And I was just closing up the shed, and all of a sudden I hear this horrendous shriek. I mean, for the lack of a better description of it, it sounded like the sound of air brakes being slammed on, glass breaking, a woman screaming at the top of her lungs, and machinery being ground to a halt. It was just like that all at once. To me, it was like that, if you stuck that into an air horn and blew it at me from about 5 feet away, that's how loud it sounded to me. Scared the bejabbers out of me. I wanted to unlock the shed and dive in real fast at that point, and just, kind of hide type thing. And I'm not one who is scared easily. But I don't know what that thing was, but it scared the living what out of me. But it sounded like it was it sounded like it was treetop level at that point. And the trees out here are about 40, 50 feet tall. So, I mean, it's a fairly old growth area of the forest. Whatever it was, I don't want to come face to face with it. I don't know if it was one of these things or if it was something else. But it was just the one time that I heard that god-awful shriek. So I'm not sure if it was a Dogman that, I don't know where the heck it would come up with that kind of noise, considering my experience with the sounds that I've heard them make before. But I imagine just about anything's possible, because we don't know much about these things yet.
You said you were doing things out there by the shed. I take it was daytime and not night.
Yeah, it was broad daylight. It was like just a little bit afternoon, and I was putting up the lawnmower, and you heard this horrendous shriek.
That's weird stuff right there. Yeah, that would be enough to shake anyone up, to say the least. In 2005, you had an actual eyes-on encounter. Please tell us about what happened that night.
Not to sound cliche, but we were coming from the Pine House, and we decided to start taking a little bit of a look on the way back towards my apartment, driving through the areas where we'd been going through to see if we could come across anything. We had one window cracked, and we were going slow in a couple areas where we knew we had heard howls and stuff before. I had 3 friends in the car. My girlfriend wasn't with us at the time, but it was my friend Mike, his wife, and my former friend Tony we were all looking around as we were going, just in case we did happen to catch sight of something. We were on Germantown Liberty Road. It does a little zigzag at one point. As I was coming around the bend of one of the zigzags, I saw something sitting in the ditch right beside a juniper tree that was there. I slowed down. You got a good look at it. We all saw this thing sitting on its haunches like a big freaking dog. We got up even with it to where the passenger side window was, where you could look straight out the window and see it, and its head was almost dead center of that window. Now, mind you, we're in a Grand Voyager van. So it was a 98 Grand Voyager, so that gives you an idea of how high we were off the ground. And where it was sitting was a good foot below, maybe a foot and a half below the level of the road. And it was, like I said, squatting on its haunches. Just as we passed it got up, and I caught it between the taillights of my van and the fact that it was a full moon. This thing was a full head, maybe head and shoulders taller than my van, and it took 2 strides across the roadway, and it wasn't running, it was just casual, 1, 2, and gone into the field on the other side. I got a real good look at the profile of this thing. It wasn't plantigrade like a Bigfoot, or like you would expect somebody in a werewolf suit to be walking or running. In other words, it was the hind legs were digigrade like a dog's, and it definitely had a tail. I got a good look at the outline of its paws, its forepaws, and they weren't paw-like. They were more like a raccoon, or maybe. I mean, they weren't primate-like because you could see the claws, and they didn't look particularly like they had a defined thumb. But if you've ever looked at a raccoon's front paws, they are very hand-like, so they can manipulate stuff and grab stuff. But from the way that I could see, I couldn't really tell if it had a fully opposable thumb or not. This thing was huge. I mean, something on the order of a minimum of 450 pounds, if I had to guess.
That is pretty big. When it was down in that ditch sitting, did it look identical to what you would expect to see from a massive dog, except it would be on a bigger scale than any dog that you would ever see? Or did it just have canine-like features? It was massive, but it didn't have the same conformation that a massive dog would have.
Well, the head was very dog-like, like a wolf or a husky, but it was shaggier. It was like, imagine if you took a husky and gave it more tufts of fur and a little bit of tuft of fur off of the ears instead of being, as smooth-edged as a husky's ears are. But this thing had a huge upper body. I mean, we're talking like almost, maybe not as muscular, but almost in proportion to what you would, okay, if you look at a dog head on at its body, its shoulders slope right off with the neck. It's like they're almost the same width as, or just a little bit wider than the head and neck. This was like a linebacker. It was like you put a dog's head onto the refrigerator Perry's body type thing. As it was going behind the vehicle, it was a really deep-chested thing, and you could really see the bulk of the upper body, and then you could see how lean it was towards the waist. I mean, it wasn't ill-proportioned, because the muscles on I could see the bulk of the muscles in the upper legs of this thing, but it was still proportioned like a really robust dog would be, where the the stomach is a lot leaner after it gets past the rib cage. But what would be the forelegs of a dog were a lot more pronounced and a lot more arm-like. And it swung its arms like a human would. Like I said, the thing was 7.5, almost 8 feet tall. I mean, we went out there the next day, and we were looking for tracks and everything, and the grass was too heavy to really find anything track-wise. But we tried to emulate how it went across that road in 2 steps. Like I said, my one friend and I, we're both 6'2", and there was just no way possible that even trying to do giant steps that we could make it across that in 2 steps. It was like straining to make it from the ditch to halfway into the middle of the first lane of the road, let alone, to the middle of the road and then across into the other side of the road where the other field was. It's just impossible. I don't even see how somebody with some sort of rigged stilts could do that with any kind of nimbleness or ease the way this thing did. It was just like it had been doing this every day of its life, just doot, gone.
While all this was going on, you were moving too fast, I'm sure, to have a chance of picking up any smells, but did you ever hear any sounds?
No, this was dead silent that night. The only thing that really, stood out majorly was the eyes. I mean, it was, the funny thing was, is these were, on this one, they weren't, at least from what I saw, they weren't red. It was like they were more yellow. I'm not sure what that indicates or what, but it was more of with these, it was, I would almost say it was the way the moonlight was hitting them, and maybe the fact that it wasn't looking directly at us or something, but we didn't hear any sound coming from it. Now, after we got past that area, we heard, other howls and everything, but we were, like I said, we were a good mile and a half from that area at that point, by the time that we started hearing other howls and everything. So we didn't hear anything directly from that particular individual creature. That's what scares me, the fact that it wasn't a bit afraid of us. It was like, okay, there's a car coming. I'll sit here, wait, and you're passing me by. It's like, okay. Just how unafraid and casual it seemed. It was like somebody waiting for the bus. I don't know if you've ever had a deer run in front of you, or you ever experienced, like, when a dog or something gets loose on the highway or something like that. The poor thing is freaked out 9 times out of 10. This thing was like, it was being perfectly calm, and intelligent. It was just waiting for me to pass, make sure that I didn't hit it almost. At least that's what it seemed like to me, like a human would, stop in the ditch and not try to dart in front of a moving vehicle type thing.
Yeah, but when you're that big and have weapons like that, I can't see why you would worry about people going by on the road next to you. I guess that's pretty much expected in that case. One night just outside of Liberty, Ohio, you and your girlfriend had a bad case of the heebie-jeebies. Tell us about that.
Which time? There's been several times. I mean, there was the most prominent one would be out there at the house where I'd gone upstairs maybe an hour before to meditate and everything. It was in the middle of summer, so we had the windows open and everything. It was a fairly cool night, relatively. I came down, and she had been on the computer. She didn't want to disturb me, but she was smelling that smell that these things had. We had, at that point, become familiar with the stench these things have, which is like, if I had to describe the stench, it's like a combination of if you've left a refrigerator or a freezer full of meat unplugged for about 2 weeks, and you open that up, and then you throw a dog that's never had a bath in its life and it's wet in your face. It would probably be enough to gag a coroner, somebody who's used to the smell of dead bodies and that type of thing. But I was talking to her as I was coming down the stairs, and it was like, don't you smell that? And I was like, yeah, I've been smelling it for almost the whole time you've been up there meditating. I'm like, these things must be close. And I had just come around the corner into the kitchen where the computer and everything was. Just about the time that I said that, my view came around to the window that was facing the back of the house, towards the cornfield. And I saw something bright red. I kind of shook my head and looked again and ducked my head down to get a better look through the open part of the window. When I did that double take, I clearly saw 2 bright red eyes looking at me from the cornfield. My legs literally buckled under me because it was just like, holy you-know-what. It's just like, yeah. Matter of fact, I think I made that kind of noise. She looked at me like, what's wrong? What's wrong? I'm like, that. And I pointed out the window. I couldn't see him anymore. I sat down on the nearest chair because I was just that shaken. She didn't see him. I took about 20, 30 seconds to gather my courage, and I grabbed one of my swords that I kept in the house and everything. I mean, I know that might sound a little funny. Why didn't you grab a gun? Well, I make swords. And I went outside, and I heard what sounded like 2 of these things. I don't know if how many people have ever really heard the sounds that wolves make when they're kind of yapping and playing back and forth with each other. Those little snarls and snips and cackles like they make. But it was like that between 2 of them that were going south through the cornfield away from where they were at. To give you an idea how close this was, I measured it off the next day that it was 50 yards from the back of the house to the edge of the cornfield. Now, this was in August, and the corn was about as tall as it's going to get. And I went back down there the next day, the place where I initially saw the eyes over the top of the windowsill, and looked out. I realized at that point that where I saw the eyes, they were like about 8 feet off the ground. The corn was taller than I could reach, and I could reach 8 feet. I can touch an 8-foot ceiling. The corn was about 9 foot tall. It was full grown, and it was like it just came to the edge of the yard and was waiting for somebody to see it. Or rather, they were. But like I said, I only saw 1 set of eyes, but apparently from what I heard, there was at least 2 in there. It was like the way they were walking away, the sounds they were making, it was like they thought it was freaking funny. They scared the living you-know-what out of me.
Yeah, they do seem to enjoy that for whatever sick reason. But then again, why do they do half of the things that they do? You mentioned that you and your girlfriend smelled that scent before you saw the eyes out there at the edge of the corn. I know you did quite a bit of research looking for Dogman with that girlfriend. What was it like having a girlfriend out there with you doing that? I mean, a lot of guys would give their left arm to have a girlfriend out there into Dogman research, beating the bush with them.
Well, there were times that she wished that she wasn't along. There was, for the most part, it was kind of nice for the fact that she was experiencing the same things I was experiencing most of the time at the same time when we were going out actively looking. There were times that she was seeing things on her own when she was going to and from the store or to and from a friend's house and I was staying at the house. She would tell me things that she was seeing or, experiencing at different points in time. There's been more than once that she told me that she would be going past certain little hangout areas that we figured out where they liked to hang out and everything, and she would see pairs of eyes from the woods, and this was before the actual experience of what I saw in the cornfield that night, from the edge of the cornfield when I was coming down from upstairs. Again, they weren't all like the bright red eyes. Some of them were like orangish stuff too. So, again, I'm not sure if that indicates whether they're male or female that they're seeing. I mean, just to draw a comparison, I don't know how many people listening have ever looked at box turtles, the tortoises that you find in the woods and stuff. The males have red eyes and the females have brown eyes. That's how you tell them apart without actually trying to probe their little cloacas. But that's the easy way to tell the sexes of box turtles apart. So, like I said, I'm not sure if the ones that we've been seeing with red eyes are males and the ones that don't have red eyes are females or what. But for there to be as many as we've come across, it's definitely more than one. But back on some of the experiences we had, there was one night that we decided to go down to the road where that farm is and everything, and where they fenced off the area and all that, in the van that I had at the time. This was a different van from the 98 Grand Voyager. It was actually a 93, and this one had a manual transmission, so that made things interesting sometimes. And it was especially interesting this one night. I hate to be laughing on this, but it was actually kind of funny from one aspect because of the fact she was flipping out. It was me, her, and her niece in the car, the van. We were going down through there slow. We had the windows down just enough to where we could hear things. We heard a howl fairly close. Just about the time that we heard that howl, I hit a real soft patch of gravel, because this was a gravel road. It lost traction, and I tried to, tried to correct it and, get it out of there, but I couldn't. So I had to try to back it in, back it out and everything else. And that was actually really well stuck. You're like, oh, for sake, get this thing out of here. Because we could kind of, you were really getting that, oh crap, feeling for the fact that we knew that if we're stuck there, we're in, what. At the same time, I don't know if other people get this feeling or not, but you could feel these things trying to encroach. We heard like stuff in the brush on the one side of the van moving through. We were hoping it was deer. It took me about 30 seconds to get it out of that real soft patch of gravel. But we tore out of there, and we heard another howl about the time that I tore out of there real close to the van. So I guess you could say that would be our close call. But I've heard things hit the van before. It wasn't that night. I've had things thrown at the van from these areas that we had more or less figured out that they like to hang out at. I don't know how many other people have had things thrown by these things. I've heard of Bigfoot and stuff throwing rocks and doing wood knocks and stuff like that. But these, I don't know if anybody's ever had it, but there was one night where she and I were together. We were going to my to where I'm at, which is my mom and stepdad's place. And we were going from her place, over there, and it was on Dayton Farmersville Road, rather. Something hit the wheel well, then bounced underneath the vehicle. I didn't really think anything of it at that point. It was like late fall, just starting to go into winter, and I thought, well, maybe it was like a horse chestnut or something that fell off of the tree late or something, or, a stick or something that I didn't see in the road or something like that. That same night, when we were coming back from my mom's place, on the same side of the road, but on the opposite side of the van, obviously, because we were coming back up the road, something hit the inside of the wheel well real hard, and I heard it bounce off the tire and then out of the wheel well. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's the same place that happened earlier, and that sounded like it really hit hard. So it was pretty evident that it was actually thrown. Then there was another time a couple years later that I was alone in the van, in the other van that I got stuck in the gravel. This was on West Carrollton Farmersville Road, which is about 2 miles from Dayton Farmersville Road. 2 miles south. If anybody's looking on Google Maps. I was passing this one patch of woods. It was like maybe about an acre and a half, but it was in a low-lying area where there was a fairly deep ditch and everything. I heard like a thump against the side of the van, and all of a sudden I heard my tire lose pressure. And I'm like, wait a minute. Because all of a sudden it was not just a low hiss, it was gone type thing. And I was on the rim of my tire within about 5 seconds. That's how hard, whatever it was, hit my van's tire. I'm sitting there on the side of the road, and I'm like, okay, this was on purpose, because the tire was in perfect condition. So I go ahead and slam it back into first gear, because I was clipping along pretty good. I was doing probably 45 miles an hour when this happened. So whatever they threw at it, they had good aim. I said, I'm not sitting here and waiting on something to try to tear the door off and pull me out. Like I said, I put it back down in first gear, and I rode that rim the other mile and a half up to the house. I didn't care about the rim of the tire at that point, because, like I said, I wasn't waiting around to see what threw it. And I could feel something staring at me when I was sitting there. I got the heck out of Dodge. It was pretty obvious at that time when my tire blew that I knew what they were trying to do that night a couple years prior. So,
one thing about all this, Adam, that just doesn't make sense to me, if you think about those big claws/talons on the ends of their fingertips, it wouldn't necessarily make it easy to throw things, because to throw an object like a rock, you have to be able to close that hand at least to a certain degree to control it, to keep it from leaving your hand before you want it to. Do you think it was a Dogman and somehow they can throw objects, or what?
Well, this is speaking from a couple different things. Number one, that night that I saw that one in profile of the moonlight in my rearview mirror, I couldn't fully tell if it had a thumb or not. If you look at somebody who, for example, has long fingernails, like a woman who has really long fingernails, if it's like, for example, a flat rock. Like I said, let me just kind of give you a little quick background on this. I used to teach martial arts, and shuriken jitsu, which is, how to throwing spikes and throwing stars, was one of my specialties. There are numerous ways that you can grip a blade in which you wouldn't have to close your hand around it. You could put it between your fingers, you could grip it between the thumb and the side of the forefinger or whatever. So even if these things didn't have thumbs, if they could get something between two of their digits and then, sling it. It's just a pinch grip is what it would be. That's the only thing I could think of that would be able to cut a tire like that. Would be like a piece of rock or a large piece of glass or something that would be flat and would have edges and points. Whether it was naturally just broken like that or if it was literally worked like you would an arrowhead or something. But like I said, it wouldn't necessarily have to worry about claws or something like that getting in the way. When I was teaching and everything, I taught people to be able to put 4 different throwing stars between all their fingers and their thumb and forefinger, and they'd be able to throw them one at a time in rapid succession. So, like I said, it's not that far-fetched, in my opinion, that these things would be able to take a flat rock or even take, using if you've ever watched a baseball pitcher take a larger rock, take a baseball, and how they put their 2 fingers over it and grip it with their thumb, and the other 2 fingers are curled up for doing a curveball. I can imagine that kind of grip. Even if you were to take your own thumb and not even use it and just put it over to the side and put something in your palm that's big enough to cup, you could take it and throw it pretty solidly. And considering the musculature that I saw on the one that I saw, it could very easily throw something pretty hefty. I could very easily see something thrown with a good amount of force in excess of 5 pounds at somebody. Very easily. I'm not sure how big some of the rocks are that people have experienced Bigfoot throwing them, at them or at their houses or whatever. But a baseball-sized rock, easy. That'd be easy picking. Let alone something like a piece of shale or a piece of limestone that naturally fractures along its own layers. That'd be real easy.
Those are all really good points. That does make sense how they could throw a rock like that, so yeah, I could see it now that you bring that up. On another note, one of the most disturbing things that you came across in your research over the years of these things involved a bloody sweater and I think a shirt along the side of the road right there by that area where the farm is. The farm where you said the fence was put up, I believe, and also the controlled area signs went up. What was so disturbing about that sweater and maybe even the shirt that I think you said you found?
Well, it was actually a full set of clothes. It was a pair of pants with a red sweater and a matching red T-shirt. And please pardon me if if I kind of, it's when I think about this, I think in fact that there had that, give me a second here, it's something that really hits me because a lot of people think these things are just imagination or fantasy, and they don't think that these things are out here and that they are potentially dangerous. And I think about what I found, what my girlfriend and I found that day, and the fact that they were shredded. I could just, it was, again, this is going to sound almost kind of cliche, but it was almost like finding something out of a horror movie. The pants themselves, I mean, I guess you'd say that on cursory examination, I looked at the labels on the stuff to see if they were all the same size. And they were all women's clothing. And they were all in the same, apparently were all from the same person because they were all matching size. And it was, for a petite sized woman. And there was a pair of black cargo type pants, or cargo style, and the pants themselves were shredded from this, a little in some places up as far as like mid-thigh down to the ankles. And it wasn't like a constant shred, but it was like several places were shredded, like it had been gripped at like 2 or 3, 4 times and just torn. And they were matted with blood, and there were maggots on it, so it was at least a day old. Well, maybe not quite a day old because the blood wasn't fully dried or anything. And the shirt and sweater I found in very close proximity to each other. And the first thing that stood out, because I hadn't picked up the shirt yet, was the fact that the stomach area of the sweater was partially unraveled. And then I looked at the shirt, and the shirt was, had a gaping hole torn in it. If I had to guess, it would be like at the bottom of the rib cage area. If it would have been on somebody at that point in time. And it was not a clean rip. It was like there were, a couple smaller tear holes along the edge, like it hit it and then it did it again and then ripped it out. And the shirt was pretty well matted with blood too. And sorry, give me a minute.
Take your time.
My girlfriend and I called the cops, and we told them what we had found, and they dismissed it, saying, "Oh, well, people dump stuff out there on Arnold Road all the time, it's nothing." And we looked around when they said that, and we didn't see a single, garbage bag or pile of garbage anywhere within sight of where we found these. Now, we decided to go back the next day because we didn't have anything to pick these clothes up in. And we went and we took a garbage bag with us. We were going to try to preserve evidence, and these clothes were gone. We found that really odd. I mean, we thought maybe if they had been, that maybe an animal or something might have dragged them a little way to try to lap the blood off of them or something. But these were just gone. They hadn't been moved anywhere from, they hadn't been moved down the road by what you'd expect a coyote or something to do or whatever. They were just gone. At that point, we just kind of looked at each other and it's like, the cops know about this. somebody knows about this, they disposed of it. My mind went back to the order of the Montgomery County Sheriff to not go looking for these things. That they made on TV, that was a one-time thing. We didn't even hear anything else about it on the news after that, as far as the order not to go looking for them. And I actually, when your listeners probably don't know this, but I was on Monster Quest a few years back on their final episode that they put out, and they asked me about this. This came up, I should say, and they never aired this.
You know, Adam, you are doing a good service by sharing this. I know it wasn't easy for you to talk about it, but you really are helping people, whether you realize it or not, by putting this information out there. And I want to thank you for that.
Going into the areas where we've pretty well figured that these things are at, which they seem to follow waterways for the most part, creeks, rivers, that sort of thing, at least in my observation and also in my research as to how long they may have been here, because it goes back to colonial times and everything in Ohio, as far as encounters with these things being reported. Going into areas, like I said, where these things are at, is kind of like knowingly going into an area where there's a rogue bear or a rogue mountain lion that's been known to kill people. It's just kind of like, oh, well, it's not going to hurt me, and then you're up next on the menu. Take that times, say, if I had to venture a guess on numbers, maybe 20 or 30. Because there's been times that my ex-girlfriend and I have gone from northern, Montgomery County and Preble County up towards Brookville, and all the way down to south of Germantown. And we've come across sign, whether it's that stench or, finding, tracks and stuff like that. And we've done this in the course of, 2 days. It's unlikely that one animal or creature, whatever you want to call it, would be over a range of roughly 40 miles in that amount of time. Also, the fact that the recording that I made and the other times that we've heard numerous howls coming from different directions, that points immediately to there being more than one. There was also photographic evidence that I've had of different sets of tracks in the snow where they were going after deer. That was a really uncomfortable night because the tracks that we got were fresh. And I mean, there was I'm going to send you a picture. Among the pictures I'm sending you, there's a track that's on the edge of the road where there's still liquid water in the track from where it had just stepped off of the road.
Ooh.
And you can see how big the track is because I laid a ruler beside it. It had stood there long enough for the snow to melt under its paw and, was, like I said, was still liquid on the road. It hadn't had a chance to refreeze. You'll be able to see the difference in the tracks between these things and the deer. If I had to judge the stride just from the ones I saw in the snow, we're talking about 6 or 7 foot stride.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, and you could see where the deer were struggling through the snow, trying to get away from them. I couldn't see where there was any blood, from deer. But that could have been further out past where the range of my flash could reach, because I was taking it with my cell phone. So these things are eaten. And like I said, what's to say we're not on the menu, especially after those clothes that we found.
Like I said before, you've taken a toll on yourself by putting this information out there, Adam. I really do appreciate the fact that you did that. It's so easy, like I said before, to think when you hear all these eyewitnesses come on the show and talk about their encounters where they walked away unscathed that maybe these things aren't dangerous, but they are. You talked about what you found and what apparently happened. I know of incidents where they apparently attacked people unprovoked. You've really done a good service by coming on and sharing the things that you've shared. Like I said before, I really do appreciate it. Having said that, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, all I can say is regarding other people who've had encounters with these things, especially close encounters, consider yourself lucky for the fact that it didn't take a swipe at you. It's pretty obvious that these things around here, anyway, have been pretty doggone aggressive. I mean, come on. One took out my tire, apparently. He tried 2 other times before that. They've been pretty brazen about culling people's cattle. I don't know if there's been any other incidents of any kind of missing persons or anything like that regarding these things, because I tried to find whoever that was, on missing persons and couldn't find them. But maybe, I don't know, maybe it was just too early, or maybe it was, ruled as some kind of a homicide or something, I don't know. But it was pretty evident to me that they were trying to cover something up. And I'm pretty certain that from other things that I've seen that the government's well aware of these things being out there. I mean, come on. The DNR and the Montgomery County Sheriff, saying not to go looking for the source of the howling. And they specifically said howling. It wasn't just, don't go looking for these things. It was, don't go looking for the source of the howling. Like I said, the disappearance of that evidence that we found, and since then, when I've been driving down through there occasionally, during the day, if it was later in the day, you would see where somebody had purposely gone along the sides of the road where there was mud and everything, and obliterated tracks and stuff, or areas where there would be tracks, I should say. Areas where fairly well off of the road, like 2-3 feet off of the road, because there's enough room for cars to pass each other on that road without very much problem. Why would they go 3 feet off of the road to try to pass each other? There's a lot more going on with these things than what a lot of people realize, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. There's so much more going on than what most people will ever realize. What's really dangerous is when people get into this, they've been in the field for a little while, and they start to have the impression that they know enough to keep themselves out of dangerous situations or whatnot, when they really don't. There's so many aspects to this that are deeply hidden that unless you've been in it for some time, you just won't learn these facts. And by putting yourself out there in the bush in these situations without knowing certain things like what I'm talking about, you're really taking your chances with your well-being. Well, Adam, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show tonight. I really appreciate you doing that and sharing all these interesting facts. Thanks so much.
No problem. And if I could say one last thing in closing to other people who are out there trying to study these things, never go alone and never go unarmed. Just common sense. These things are predators.
Well, thanks again so much, Adam. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a great night.
You too. I'm glad to have been able to hopefully help some people.
Oh, I'm sure you did. Well, thanks again, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.